Hi everyone, welcome to this beautiful room in Art Science Museum. My name is Derek. I represent the Up Singapore Civic Innovation community as well as our sister community, Dextra, the data community. When we first started this whole journey with IDA, I think back in July, since then we've actually received some pretty overwhelming response to this data visualization challenge. In total, we had more than 400 people show up for the launch as well as the workshops. And we've got a lot of emails, a lot of interest from everyone emailing us, asking us about the competition. And we've encouraged you to actually tell us your Singapore story. And we fully recognize this is actually quite a big challenge, you know. You've got to think about the story that you wanted to tell. You've got to wrangle the data. You've got to think about how to use the data to tell the story, and all throughout the whole thing, actually, you know, maintain the narrative, which today is turned into a presentation. So I know that this is also the first time that a lot of you are actually doing data visualization. In fact, for the very seasoned data people, they say that it's also the first time they're actually using data to tell the story in this particular way. So thank you very, very much for everybody for putting in this sort of effort. And in spite of all these challenges, we had 28 team submissions. I've spoken to a lot of, quite a few industry professionals, and they were really, really pleasantly surprised that there were so many teams that actually managed to put in submission. This really speaks of the caliber that's out there in the community. We hopefully in the new year we can actually do more such activities to get everybody engaged and actually tap on this energy and this interest from the community. So thank you to all the teams. Every single one of you put so much work, the time and heart into your work. We hope we all had fun. The 10 teams today were all actually presenting quite unique presentations in terms of the data they use, in terms of story techniques that they are using, the tools they've used. So I think that's really the beauty of storytelling. Some of these presentations charted our socio-economic progress, our openness to the rest of the world, some things that make our Singapore community unique, like our garden city, our national songs, and some things that we love, like food and property prices. So it's all celebrating our past, our present, and really looking forward to the future. And I really look forward to these presentations. And all of this celebrates the wonderful diversity that is Singapore. So before I go on, there are a lot of people that I need to thank. So I mentioned that we will be working with the IDA team, the wonderful IDA team, Hui Suan and Diana, on this particular challenge. They put in so many hours of work to make this happen. And this is of course in celebration of SG50. And we've had the support of the Smart Nation program, the data.gov.sg platform, which a lot of you tapped into in order to get your government data sets, as well as MumMap, who actually released all the archival maps from 1954, if I remember correctly. Sorry. Oh, sorry. May I direct your attention to the other screen there? This is the first time I have to deal with 4 screens. So we've got a lot of agency partners who contributed a lot of wonderful data sets for us to play with. Amongst them, Department of Statistics of Singapore, Singapore Heritage Society, Singapore Heritage Board, National Library Board, Science Centre Board, Ministry of Finance, and Singapore Land Authority. We've also had a lot of support from our 3 program partners, the Art Science Museum. Thank you, Honor, the Executive Director of Art Science Museum, who's also a judge today, for actually giving a lot of advice on how to make this program a lot better. And also we've had a lot of support from LaSalle College of the Arts. Many of you would have heard Andreas present at the workshop, as well as being a mentor. And also, thank you to Singapore Heritage Society, who Eileen today is one of our judges. Eileen also provided a lot of context and a lot of advice on how to make this program a lot richer. And I also like to thank the three technology partners who provided the tools that some of you used, DataWatch, Click, and Red Hat. Now, so what's in play today? So we've got cash prizes of 6,000, 4,000, and 2,000 for the top three teams, and the remaining 7 teams will win $500 each. And teams, if you impress the judges, you could actually get an opportunity to showcase your work in national libraries or National Museum or Science Center, or even actually in this room on all these 4 screens. So, and speaking of the judges, they are Mr. Pabir Sen, Chief Data Scientist of IDA, Ms. Honor Hager, Executive Director, Art Science Museum, Mr. Chuck Kong Soon, Managing Director, Stream Global and President of Singapore Computer Society, and Dr. Chua Eileen, President of Singapore Heritage Society, Associate Professor Benjamin Gunn of Information Systems, SMU. So the format this afternoon is all the 10 teams will be given 4 minutes to present. We'll be very strict with the time, just to be fair. And they will be given 2 minutes of Q&A time, so the judges have 2 minutes to ask them some questions. As a reminder, please put your phones to silence. And let's maintain silence so that the teams can concentrate on their presentations. But you can take out your phones and tweet. So these are the hashtags that we encourage you to use. And I think that's it for me. We'll get the show up and running. And have lots of fun. And then, yeah, we'll start with the first team. That's Team Geelong.
Good afternoon, my name is Chi Long. I'm here to talk about my project, Singapore Song Stories, which is quite a highly personal project of mine. I'd actually like to start by showing this animation that's actually on the live microsite. It's actually at songs.biz.sg that will explain what data visualization is all about. So, basically, a data visualization is something that I believe will let readers explore and find new songs and ways to look at data themselves. Singapore Song Stories is actually a collection of all the Singapore National Day songs that are put together into one place. And each of these boxes that you see here is actually represents a YouTube link to a particular song. So for example, if you were to actually click on any one of them, like Tanya Chua's Where I Belong, it will actually take you to the actual YouTube. itself, right, is not that interesting. But what is interesting is that you want to carve out the different songs, right, such that you can actually sort and animate and find different bits of them. Because the songs are not just songs released by the Singapore government, but also parodies, original songs, and a variety of different songs, right, written by the Singaporean public in general. So for example, if you are interested in songs that have been written most recently, perhaps you can just click on the year itself, and then it will just show you all the songs from 2014 onwards. If I want to actually sort by the other dimension, you can actually see that the earliest song that is actually inside this particular list is Majula Singapura from 1958. If you are interested to find out, let's say, what are some of the songs, the most YouTube views, then you just click on it. It will actually all sort into the corresponding audio. Surprisingly, it's actually we live in Singapore. We live in Singapura, right, for San Leong, so it's just one of them. There are actually many ways. There are about 80 plus of the songs here, and I would exhort everyone to actually go to the live website to actually take a look at it. It's actually at songs.biz.sg. It should actually work for the mobiles and the tablets as well. And other interesting things, like for example, if you want to find cool mashup covers, that particular piano rendition of Home was actually by Vin Mint. It's actually one excellent piano renditions of the song itself. So, and I will just take a quick aside to talk about the technology behind this. So actually the data is compiled from a variety of different sources. So I took the songs from places like the Singapore.sg, which is actually curated by MCI. And then you're using SG, which is the NLP that's, and you're using Singapore, but archived by the National Arts Council. So on top of that, I had to do a bit of my own research for Wikipedia and Peeps, put it all together, and it come out with visualization. Technology-wise, it's mainly written in HTML5. The visualization is done in D3, animation is done in InSong, and some of the data transform is done in R. And I hope you like it, and I hope you would like to just take the time to try and have some nostalgia about the songs of our past. Okay? Thank you. I guess, as it started in the introduction, what makes it Singapore? What makes us Singaporean? I mean, there are many things that you can actually visualize and talk about. You can talk about our housing, our transport, our various things. But sometimes in the day-to-day living in our country, we have all these browsers that we always have. But you forget the things that make us nostalgic for certain things. And there's a certain theme when I play the opening bars of Home. If you are Singaporean here, right, you've heard of it. There will be some nostalgic longing for it. And I think it's actually a neutral and good enough topic, right, that will help to bind Singaporeans together for SG15. That's just my answer for that, rather than doing some other visualization and something else.
Hi, my question's more around how do you see this as a data visualization? I mean, it's a beautiful project. It's you know, it's wonderful, you know, kind of research. I'm going to spend lots of time with it. But how do you, what's your understanding of this as data visualization?
I guess I always felt that the data visualization needs to be something that is assessed and used by the end public. Okay, because I have a background as an ex-media, as an ex-journalist, so it needs to communicate or tell a story of some sort. And for that, right, I guess in actually doing the songs, actually researching the data for the songs itself. So I guess I don't know whether that answers your question, but it got me more interested in coming out to actually enhance visualization. And there are lots of other things I would love to do. For example, like you actually get the public to vote on what are the best songs, things like that. That would be cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Chilong.
Testing. My name is Hanif. This is my friend and collaborator Paul. And today we are going to share our visualization called the Singapore News Story.
So when we thought about telling stories in Singapore, the thing we thought of immediately was who's really telling stories on a daily basis? Who has storytelling as their passion, as their profession, and they're doing it? And let's look to them. And so the thing we thought of was the people, the men and women who beat the streets, investigate stories, and every day. And those are the people of the news. And so we went to the National Library Board, which keeps an archive of the Straits Times, for example. Which is a newspaper that's been telling the news, the stories of Singapore since 1845. We crawled the headlines for the last 50 years, since 1955. And we used a set of natural language processing, different analytic methods to tokenize, to produce the words that show up in the news so that we could look at the stories. And then we decided we would do it in a way, instead of summarizing all the stories that get wrapped up into that, we would do it in a way that allowed anyone to access it and to reproduce it and to do it themselves and to find the stories that matter to them. And here's the stories that matter to us.
So when you think about Singapore and the stories that have shaped this country, what are you thinking of? You might be thinking about our politics, our economy. There are many different ways in which we could play at this. So one of the first things that we wanted you to see was what are the top words that were used in the headlines of the past 50 years? Because that immediately tells you a story. So if you just captured the top 10 words that were used in the headlines of the past 50 years, here's what you'll see. And immediately your eyes are drawn to some pretty dramatic changes. So here we have Tengku. If you remember history, this is Tengku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia. So he was our Prime Minister as well when we were part of Malaysia, but notice how he's so prominent even before and after merger, right? And then you get words like die. It's just a verb, but death, accidents, killings. So a sense of urgency and violence. But notice how the words actually decrease over time. So interesting stories like that. But what's even more interesting is that if you change the parameters of how you look at the top words, you get other things appearing. So if we squint a little harder and actually look at the top 15 words, for example, you get this huge spike in 1980. And what does it say? It says Chinese. Now, what could possibly be happening at the time? So this is where the value of what we've put together comes in, because you're able to just switch, and then you can look at the actual headlines that are associated to the word. So here's that peak there, and if you just hover over it, here's what you see. So remember, this is on the front pages of the Straits Times. So does anyone remember what language policy was being implemented back then? It was the Speak Mandarin campaign, Jiang Huai. So just think about that. The government actually went to the extent of promoting the use of the Mandarin language in our English language daily newspapers. So it's, little anecdotes like that, which you'll miss if you just were looking at the papers themselves. But an analysis like this would enable. And the other thing that we tried to do as well with this visualization tool was a context enabler. So you can see the kinds of associations that are tagged to a certain word.
And so on that previous graph, there's over 4,000 words that were used total, right? And you can look for any of them and see how they change over time. But we can also, and this is a sort of, you see this as an ongoing project, all the code's there. What you can do is you can see the way the words are used together. And you begin to see, what words are showing up with other words. well, yeah. So that's basically it. But the site is live. You can see it at Singapore News GitHub.io. The data is all behind it, and it's there for you to explore and tell your own story, because it's also about telling your Singapore story.
So Paul and Hanif,
Yes.
you went through the data and you did some analysis. Do you see a pattern that interests you? Some story about Singapore?
So precisely, like, I mean, this was one of the most interesting things that I came across. So when we were doing the parsing, there are a lot of junk words that we had to remove, like prepositions, of, I, things like that. And when I was looking at the headlines, we almost wanted to remove Chinese.
Is there a trend? It seems to be graph going down.
Oh, I mean, you can even form a hypothesis about that. Like, well, to me, that seems to suggest that back then, in the 50s and 60s, things were more urgent. There were a lot more things to talk about in the headlines. Whereas as we progress, you know, things kind of got more stable, and you see less words over time. Perhaps that's what's going on.
Another one that I found interesting was that in the early days, the first 2 decades, there's lots of notions of civil turbulence, strike, tin, all the mining things that were going on, lots of violent terms that connote those. And you see over time they've dropped off almost completely. I think that's a really interesting story about civic development and how Singapore has grown as a nation, a diverse nation.
And what technology did you use to rendition this visual?
So we use kind of a suite of technologies. To crawl, we used Python and R, which was able to pull those in. And then we also used that for a lot of the natural language processing methods that we did to tokenize, to engram, things like that. The thing is, when you start to look at, for instance, words like a co-occurrence matrix, it gets really big. So what we did was we also used the Django backend to serve all the data so that you can get it rather than, because it's just too much. 4,000 words, they go together in over 1 million ways. And then to render it, we used HTML5, JavaScript, and the D3 library to put together all the pieces.
This next team is 2359 Media, and I think the title is Land of Wealth and Growth.
Hi everyone. I'd just like to have a quick show of hand. Who here have been to the speaker's corner before? Are you there to just walk around or to hear a talk? Right. None? Okay, so most of you have not been. Well, actually, neither have I. I'm Kai Wei from 2359 Media. Singapore has experienced tremendous growth over the last 50 years. From a fishing village, we've grown to a modern society we are today. The 2 key questions that we ask ourselves is, what have we done to get all this success? And what can we as individuals do to ensure the survival of Singapore going forward 50 and 100 years? So to answer those questions, we combed through 10 years of population and property data and overlaid that with key events that have happened and policies. We even invited our PM Lee to narrate the story for us. I'm not kidding, it's PM Lee, you can actually hear it later. And hopefully with all these key elements, bring about patterns and insights for the users to see. Without further ado, I would like to invite PM Lee to start telling you the story of Singapore.
If we want to grow our tourism traffic and double the number of tourists to Singapore, we don't just want them to come here because of gambling. But if gambling is one of the things they want to do, then maybe we should allow them to do that.
Right, so that was in 2004. During that time, Singapore is considering whether to build a casino or not, right? We're weighing the effects of whether we're going to get more gambling addicts versus bringing in more revenue. 2006, we picked in cents. 2008, financial crisis hit us. And we asked ourselves, can we survive?
Has slowed down. Our manufacturing sector has been affected. Our exports are weak this year. Tourist arrivals are down. Even Asian tourists are traveling less, partly because airline fares have gone up with fuel costs.
This is it's an accelerated timeline just for this presentation. But if you go to the site, you can actually hear the whole storyline being talked out. There are three key features here. As you can see from the landscape, the property actually reflects accurately the economic status at the time. Secondly, we placed markers to tell you the relevance of the story to the map. Thirdly, users can actually upvote and downvote and give an indication whether they are for or against the policy. Right? This answers our second question, that as individuals, how can you contribute back? And we believe that with visualization tools like this, linked with stories, you can first understand and then give feedback.
We have all contributed to the Singapore story. At the heart of the Singapore story is our belief in Singapore. Belief that we can turn vulnerability and despair into confidence and hope. Belief that out of the trauma of separation, we could build a modern metropolis and a beautiful home. Belief that whatever the challenges of this uncertain world, we can thrive and prosper as one united people. Let this belief and spirit burn bright in each one of us and guide us forward for the next 50 years and more. Together, let us be the pioneers of our generation. Together, let us create a brighter future for all Singaporeans.
Right. Can everyone give PM Lee a round of applause? Thanks. Well, with that, I would like to bring you the singaporestory.com. This site will be live after this event to collect votes from everyone. If you don't like his policies, please go and vote. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, your graphics look quite good, but what does the color represent and why is it moving up and down?
Okay, so there is two modes to this visualization. There's the storyline mode, which is just what I showed you. The second mode is actually the property price mode. With that, let me just bring up the.
If we want to grow our tourism traffic.
Right, the colors actually represent how expensive they are. Right.
We don't just want
Initially, when they're orange, they're actually not expensive, and as time goes by, it turns purple and it turns crazy blue. That's where, you know, it's the recent 2014 years. I can actually give you the link to play around with it later, but the visualization seems to take more than a few seconds to load up. Right, there you go. Maybe as that loads, we can go on to the next question.
In the second quarter, our growth has slowed
right,
down.
that's a good question.
Our manufacturing
GDP can actually fulfill that. But if you tell someone GDP last year in Singapore is how many $billion,
even Asian tourists are traveling less.
It just doesn't
Partly
do
because
that. Right, that's why we chose property, because property is firstly highly visual.
But if
Secondly,
gambling is
if
one
you
of
tell
the things they
someone
want to
property
do,
prices was 700,000 a few
then
years back,
maybe we should
now it's
allow
1.2
them to
mil,
do that
they
in
actually
Singapore.
get
Find
that
some way to do
immediately
that.
and they get
And
the
as a
growth and how
result
it
of that,
impacts
like
them.
over 10 years, double the traffic volume, I think we should think about it.
From
We
the
also
data,
need,
what
as a government,
insights
to
do you
encourage
get?
participation and
Right.
debate. We
Thanks
have
for
opened
that.
up
So I
over
always
the years
have no
into
time
the
to talk about that.
Speaker's Corner. We've
The
allowed a lot
insights
more
that
discussion.
we actually got is to build a nation, it actually takes years of planning. You plant a seed today, and it takes 10 years for you to see it.
We're going to build a new
Right.
downtown in the new
Before
areas,
actually
link it up
reading
with the
all
old
this
city,
data, you
and extend
actually
the
don't
city
get a good
contributed
visualization
into
of
the
it
Singapore
until
story.
you put all 10 years
So at
together
the heart of the
and start
Singapore
to become
story,
clearer.
their gardens is our belief.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
As a senior consultant physician at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, I've seen the deadly consequences of dehydration firsthand. The Singapore water story is not just a story about Singapore, but is a story about our survival. Imagine that you are in a desert with no water in sight. You will develop a thirst unlike anything you have ever felt. After a day or two, your saliva thickens. Your throat becomes so dry that when you swallow, it feels as if two sheets of sandpaper are scraping together. Your tongue becomes so swollen that you have difficulty breathing and you feel as if you are suffocating. Parts of your skin begin to fracture and form painful splinters and fissures, while other parts become thin and flake off. Your lips shrink and eventually they disappear. You become delirious, and after some time, your organs fail, and in 3 days, you die. Water is a vital and precious resource, and although we are surrounded by it, only 3% is potable fresh water. Compared to the size of this globe, 3% is roughly the size of this period.
The World Health Organization states that today 1 in 10 people lack access to clean and safe drinking water, and this results in 3.4 million deaths per year, which is roughly the population of Singapore when you exclude migrant and transient workers. Now let me ask you if anyone has ever lived in a country that looks like this. Anyone? Well, all of your hands should actually be up because these are actually photos of Singapore from the 1950s and 1970s. The UN once ranked Singapore 170 out of 190 countries in terms of potable freshwater availability because we have no natural aquifers and the common occurrence of flooding would often contaminate our drinking water supply. Seeing that this was one of our greatest vulnerabilities, our leaders devised an ambitious plan to become water secure. Though we're not there yet, this is how far we've come in the last 5 decades.
Compared to the 1960s, we're currently able to meet most of our daily water needs, even though our population has more than tripled. This is in part due to the fact that our land mass has increased by more than 25%, allowing us to store more fresh water. We are commonly mentioned as the little red dot, but I want the UN and the rest of the world to think of us as the little blue dot. And on our little blue dot, we have 17 reservoirs, 32 rivers, and a catchment area that spans 2/3 of the island with the plan to increase it to 90% of the island so that every raindrop counts.
We've increased over the last decade our ability to desalinate water with a new plant that just opened last year. There are 5 water reclamation plants, 4 of which have reverse osmosis capabilities, allowing us to recycle water, making each drop count more than once. This is all part of our 4 national tap strategy that turns unusable, dirty water into clean and drinkable, safe water, which undergoes 65,000 safety and quality tests that far exceed World Health Organization standards. Our current daily demand is 400 million, and the current approximate distribution of each of the taps is as follows. And as you can see, about 1/3 of our daily water needs is still supplied by imported water, but the goal by 2060 is to have the imported water tap reduced while increasing the other 3 taps, making Singapore completely water independent. In addition to this presentation, we summarize the Singapore water story into a 1-page infographic, and here you'll see some of the agencies whose data sets we used. We hope that this water story will give you a greater sense of appreciation that despite living in a small land-scarce nation with 0 natural aquifers, we all can have clean and safe drinking water. Thank you.
Could you use a bigger and bigger infographics with more statistics into it?
We just were able to print this one, but yes, it can be made much larger.
You're so clear. I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This next team is EduCity. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We are Team EduCity. As we have deeply benefited from the Singapore education system, we feel compelled to share with you the Singapore education story. We feel that this story is a story about pride and success for all Singaporeans. The Singapore Edu story is a historical reflection of the Singapore education system and how it has evolved over the years. It consists of key milestones such as policy changes and events that occur. You can either zoom into the years of interest, or you can view the event one by one. For now, let's fly back to 1961, where the PSC scholarship was established. Let's dive deeper into the PSC scholarship. PSC scholars usually proceed to become key government leaders and make major policy decisions. Hence, we feel that the PSC stories will give us insight into Singapore's past and future. This boss actually represents each and every PSC scholar from 2002 to 2013. If you mouse over it, you can actually see where they are from, the school, and the current position. We get this data from LinkedIn and government directories. And the color represents the school they are from. Okay, a bit slow, but and you can sort the scholars by gender, the courses, and the scholarship. I would like to draw your attention to the courses they have selected. Economics and humanities actually take up almost half of the selection. At first sight, you may feel that that's good, what's so special about it? But if you have observed over the years, you can realize that there's an overall decline in the STEM scholars, and there's an increase in soft skill disciplines. And this, we feel that have a deep impact to Singapore's future. As analysts have observed, that engineering discipline usually are more grounded in their thinking, and they are more, they do hyper theoretical their assumptions. Hence, and economics disciplines may not be practical and in real life situation. Well, so we feel that essentially we feel that there's nothing right or wrong in the selection, but we feel that essentially what we want to achieve through the visualization is for people to observe the impact of the PSC scholars, scholarship, PSC story, and make your own conclusion to how this story will affect Singapore's future. Now, let us go back to the 1965,
where Singapore become independent. As a result of continuous investment in education, there's a significant improvement to the education system, and many students like Sharifa have benefited. Sharifa is actually a girl that we have personified using data and story we have gathered. Through her, we can see the overall progress of the education system. In the good old days, you can see that not many teachers can attend to the students, and many students do not have access to post-secondary education, to about 50% in 1995, to more than 90+% in 2011. And the female to male ratio have even been reversed today. If you see that, we have been called as a little red dot by other countries, but I feel that the little red dot have achieved immense progress over the years, and this is something we should be proud of. Now, come back to today. We have shared with you how the brightest students in Singapore have contributed to the policy and the making of modern Singapore. We have also shared that through Sharifa, the education systems have produced good results for everyone. So education, we believe that is the foundation that we lay for success, and it will continue to be the key ingredient, the key for us to build a smarter and better nation. Thank you.
So I understand you have to research the LinkedIn to get some of these PSC scholars. How much time did you spend on it? Do you look at other sources besides LinkedIn?
All right. Most of the scholars, they engage in government institutions and all that. So we browse through data.gov.sg and also the data directories. And I think also we Googled their Facebook accounts and LinkedIn and everything. So I think it takes a lot of effort, but I guess it's worth it because we ourselves want to know where they are now. So.
So is your data source once off, meaning that if someone updates and all, do you have a program that picks it up, or how do you update, or is it this is the end?
Okay. We hope that there will be a continuation to this after our project. So we have contribute your own stories, so functions. So anyone who know where the scholars are right now, they can contribute their status to our website. Yes.
We have emailed PSC but PSC said that they will think about it. So because all this new come from the government, a lot of them are in the civil service. So if they are unwilling to share, it might be a little hard. So we'll see how it goes.
This next team is minus 2063.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to share with you my family story. The story begins with Madam Lo Fong Lan. Nearly 50 years ago, she left Penang and came back to Singapore because of a failing marriage. She's illiterate and she worked terribly hard to provide my brother and my sister and myself a proper lives as well as education in Singapore. With that, I can go further to Hong Kong and spend 18 years and became a professional. Today, I'm home with my families. If you look at how Singapore has progressed over the years, since my mother came back. This is the GDP over the years, and this is the GDP per employed and workers in Singapore. You've seen that Switzerland is here and Singapore is here. In the year 2013, we have caught up with Switzerland. That's our dream in the 70s, to be the Switzerland of Asia. How did Singapore do that? It's really through the hardworking families like yours and mine that we progressed to be the first-class city in the world. This is what we have today. 100,000 US dollars per worker in Singapore. Of course, this is not everybody. It varies from industry to industry, where my grandmother, who's a construction worker, was at this range. My mother, who's a chicken rice seller, was at this range. And for me, with the education, I command a much higher contributions to this economy. I can't help but wonder what's next for my children. Therefore, I bundle all this data and put it in the projection tools into our next Jubilee. Well, next Jubilee is not for me, it's for my next generation. So I'd like to invite my daughter, Elsa, to share with you her thoughts after using the calculator.
Hi, everyone. While working with my mother on this story, I've learned a few key things. So this calculator projects into 2063. So by then, I'll be this grandmother walking to the market. And one thing I learned is that we need to grow smarter. We can't possibly afford to stay as we are right now. As you can see, if we grow at the same rate as GDP, we would need 3.4 million workers. But if we do not grow smarter and be more productive, we will need 2 million more workers. That would mean a lot more workers. Okay, so another thing is that we can't take stability for granted. If you look at that declining economy over there, yeah, that's Kuwait. Kuwait declined in economy because of war. And for that, we just need to learn that we cannot take stability for granted. Lastly, I can't imagine what it's like to take a boat or a plane to somewhere new or try new things. But I will embrace my future with the same passion and sense of adventure my mother and my grandmother has taught me. And if we all do that, I believe our nation will continue to prosper and grow. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about, what data you're visualizing here, and what overall story you're trying to convey to us through that data.
It's really the pursuit of a better living from 3 generations of, my grandmother who went to Penang because of work. My mother came back because to provide us better educations, as well as, I came back here because this place is prosperous. I want to give my daughter better educations. So with that, the data that I've seen, people is the only assets that we have here, the most precious assets we have here. Productivity is one key quantifiable measurement that we can have, I can use. Therefore, I use the Conference Board Organization's economics data that was shows on the bar chart that equalize, and we can compare all the countries in the world for the last 60 years, their GDP as well as the GDP per worker.
Thank you for that. It was a very moving story. I'm just wondering, for someone who's not here listening to your presentation, how are they going to connect that personal story you show of your mother and your grandmother with the GDP chart, which I think is the part that's very visually compelling? How would they understand the connection between those two parts of the story?
Well, if it's needed to be shared without our presentations, we'll have to put it as a storyboard with, some descriptions and, audios, if it's on a video mode or if it's on a text mode, we'll probably find some ways to share that.
This next team is Free Fly.
Good afternoon, I'm Jin.
And I'm Keith.
And we're here to share with you our data project on the tourism landscape of Singapore called On the Dot. Just a little bit about ourselves. We both have daytime jobs. I'm a product manager at OCBC.
And I'm an IT tech project manager with Sephora Asia.
We first came across this challenge via Surprise Surprise, the newspaper, and we thought this would make a really fun weekend hack. As avid travelers, we wanted to do something travel related, though this time round, not around the globe, but right here in our hometown. And it's a great way for us to learn about Singapore and showcase the dramatic changes that has happened in our Singapore tourism landscape.
We use HTML5, jQuery, as well as D3 to visualize the data we obtain from data.gov.sg as well as the STB websites. Now let's take a look at the actual product. For a start, we'll have a look at Singapore's tourist numbers as well as the expenditure value. Now the flags represent countries, whereas solid color bubbles are regions. In general, we see an upward trend of the bubbles moving towards that direction and growing in size. Now look, there's a sudden drop in 2003 due to the SARS global outbreak, and the situation recovers quickly in response to various global and local events that happen around the world in Singapore. For instance, we have our Singapore F1 Grand Prix in 2008. So in view of time, we'll move on to the next visualization.
Okay, so right now, you're looking at the top attractions of Lonely Planet's #1 country to visit in 2015. In 2005, Orchard Road was first, followed by Chinatown and Little India. To spice things up, we've also added some fun facts regarding all the attractions in every year. Let's take a look at Jurong Bird Park in 2005. From here, you can tell that it's really popular among our Indian, Filipinos, and Thai visitors, with 27% of Indian tourists going there. But did you know that our wildlife reserves do much more than just showcase animals? In 2006, the first and only avian hospital was opened in Jurong Bird Park in Southeast Asia. Okay, during our research, we also found that the National Orchid Garden is a hit among royalties and celebrities. The King of Cambodia visited in 2006, Zhou Xun in 2008, and most recently in 2012, the Royal Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, with the orchid vendor William Catherine presented to them during their visit, adding to the collection of orchids named after Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana. Okay, it's also not surprising to see that the National Orchid Gardens is more popular among the European tourists, with 17% of French visitors going there in 2012. The Singapore city skyline, as you know, has also changed dramatically in the last decade. 2005 was when PM Lee announced the building of our 2 integrated resorts. 6 years later, MBS is up as the world's most expensive building. And just a year, shortly after, it overtook longtime favorites Chinatown and Sentosa to become Singapore's number 2.
We hope you feel the same sense of pride like we did during this project. And this project has helped us revisit old memories, like myself's visit to the zoo 20 years ago with my family. So as Singaporeans, even though we're not tourists per se, but these attractions have interwoven into our lives, such as running the Stanchart Marathon, through the integrated resorts in Sentosa, as well as the OCBC cycle along the Singapore Flyer.
Some things are best experienced for yourself, so hope you can visit our link above.
Hi guys, thanks very much for that, really fascinating. Lots and lots of data in there, lots of stories, you know, kind of fun facts as you point out. But what's the kind of overarching message that you're trying to communicate with this data visualization?
I think at first we wanted to showcase more of just an overview of Singapore's economy and the tourism landscape. But as we went into the project, we wanted to show like the more personal, the more interesting side of Singapore. And that was when we started to pull out all the fun facts. And we learned really interesting things about like the avian hospital, lost vouchers being found by the public and brought to the Jurong Bird Park to be nursed back to health and out in the wild. And even like our Clarke Quay infrastructure. So I mean, these things in the end became the key of our project rather than the data, even though that was where we began.
In your perspective, what has changed in 20 years in the Singapore tourism?
Okay, if you look at our data in 2005, our top attraction was Orchard Road. It was like 71% of people visited there. But I think 20 years later, you can see that even though I think in 2012 it was the top, but fewer tourists are visiting there because there have been more attractions popping up, like our Gardens by the Bay, Singapore Flyer, MBS, and most recently in 2013, MBS was the top. So I think we have become more diversified with more attractions rather than just a shopping belt. Yeah, that's what we came up with out of our data visualization project. Thank you.
This next team is Green Fingers.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Celeste, and I represent Green Fingers today. This is my team. Today, I would like to tell all of you the story of a lady whose life story is intertwined with the development of parks in Singapore. Here goes. My mom was born in the early 1950s. Today, she likes to take long strolls in Hawke Park with my dad. Like many other elderly couples, they never tire of these walks. Because Hawke Park is connected to so many other parks in the southwest region of Singapore, they get to explore a different park each week. The Southern Ridges is just part of an impressive island-wide park connector network in Singapore. Going back to early 2012, when Gardens by the Bay first opened, I brought my mum there. We thoroughly enjoyed the shade and the design of the Cloud Gardens. Because my mum worked in M-Parks for close to a decade, she was really proud of how far Singapore has come with respect to the development of parks. I showed my mum some of the Twitter mentions of these parks, the size of the bubbles, representing the popularity of each park, with newspaper networks like the Straits Times linking the different parks together. Going back to the early 1990s, my mum brought my younger sister and I to East Coast Park, a beloved place for recreation by many locals. It was there where we developed a love for the outdoors and for water sports. East Coast Park received much news coverage at that time, the size of the news bubble directly representing the number of news mentions it received from the 1950s to 2009. As you can see from this map, it received a lot more news mentions than any other park you would see in Singapore. Unfortunately, it has been replaced in popularity today by newer parks in the central region of Singapore. My mum married my dad in the Japanese gardens. That was in the year 1976. You may not know this, but the Japanese gardens and the Chinese gardens were popular places to get married in at that time, even more so than the botanic gardens. It was even a popular filming destination for many local TV favorite shows. Back in the early 1970s, my mum took up a job at the Parks and Recreation Department of Singapore due to her love for biology. It has now been converted to NParks. In her job there, she was responsible for developing Fort Canning Park into the public green space we all know and love today. This is the description of Fort Canning Park. As you can see here, it is classified as an arts and heritage park, alongside many other parks like the Botanic Gardens. There are a total of 6 park classifications in Singapore, including coastal parks. Singapore has come a long way in becoming a garden city with the help of people like my mother, and we now have about 50 parks scattered all around the island. I now come to the first milestone of my mother's life, Botanic Gardens. It was a popular hangout in the 60s after Lee Kuan Yew's famous tree planting campaign in 1963. It was there when she went on many dates in her heyday. Many heritage trees scatter the island, scatter the gardens, but she remembers one particular heritage tree fondly, the rain tree. My mother is not the only one with fond memories of that tree. Many talk about picnics held under that tree in public platforms such as SG Memories. My mother's stories and other people's stories are just collective memories held about that rain tree across Singaporeans of all ages. I have now come to the end of my mother's story and of the story of parks in Singapore. We are sure all of you have your own interesting stories to tell about parks too. Thank you.
Celeste, very touching story.
Thank
Can you
you.
explain a little bit about the illustration of the photos with the figures that you have?
Sorry?
The photos and the figures that you have, the dogs, the orchid and all that. Are those photos that you took yourselves or?
You're talking about the collage
Yeah, the
of
collage,
photos?
yes.
Yeah, they're actually Instagram photos that we collected, and they are hashtag with the hashtag of the parks that they represent. So these are different pictures we see of Instagram users who took photos in the Botanic Gardens.
Hi Celeste, thank you. So there were a lot of stories going on, I felt there. Besides your mother's personal experience, is there a kind of another bigger story that we can derive out of all the visualizations that you have?
Yes, the biggest story is that this is actually to raise awareness about parks in Singapore. And I think for the 4 of us, it brings back a lot of nostalgia. And we hope to bring that for everyone here as well.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Hi everyone, I'm Maxine from Team Cadence, and today I'm going to share with you our interpretation of the Singapore story titled From Kampong to Skyscrapers. So who we are? We are a team of market researchers, and we believe that the best way for our audiences to retain information and content is to tell a story with the data visually. So our story begins back in 1965 when Singapore just gained its independence, and it shows how Singapore has progressed over the next 5 decades to present. Most importantly, it shows how Singapore managed to retain its culture and values throughout these significant changes. So I remember when I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell me stories about how life was so tough in post-war Singapore, and how they began to rebuild Singapore and to make it, as successful as it is now. So we wanted to document these stories and memories not only to commemorate the efforts of our forefathers in nation building, but also serve to remind younger generations the humble beginnings of Singapore. So we made a video on it, and here it is.
My dad always tells me, boy, you know you are very lucky. Long before you were born, I grew up in a kampong and our roof was always leaking when it rains. Our Malay neighbours used to give us goreng pisang, which is still my favourite snack. Hi, boy, life was simple but not easy. Dad is not as fortunate to attend higher education as he needs to support the family. So after army, with only O-levels, he found a job in a factory where he met Mum. Unlike Dad, I grew up in a HDB and attended the PAP kindergarten around the block. Growing up, my friends and I used to play catching around the playground. Those were the days. As the economy grew, more and more foreigners see Singapore as an attractive place to invest and work in. One of my happiest memories was when my dad got a pay raise when he joined a huge multinational company and I got more pocket money. My parents worked very hard to provide me with a university education, and I will never forget the tears of joy the day I donned my graduation gown. I am now working in a local bank with endless growth opportunities. Although my grandparents, my parents, and I grew up in a very different era, there is one thing that will always remain the same.
Great. So our infographic, or motion graphic as we call it, touch on various government data. So we look at statistics for housing, employment, education, and our GDP over the past 50 years. Right, so, and finally, to showcase that despite all these significant changes and development, our families do play an important role in our lives. So, where do we get our data? So we use a variety of open government sources to make it accessible to everybody. So it's data.gov.sg, SingStat, and also population census that we can't get from online because it's in the 1960s and 1970s. And this infographic was put together with Adobe Illustrator and After Effects. So we also add, initially we had like just words, but we felt that to edit, to make it more personalized, we had somebody from our Cadence family to add the narration. Great, so we hope you enjoy the motion graphic as much as we did, and thank you very much.
Hi, thanks for the really fun motion graphic. Was there anything when you were doing it that surprised you about the data that you were discovering or the kinds of comparisons that you made over time? Was there anything that like unexpected for you?
Not really, because I'm born and raised in Singapore, and this is what we learn in history, really. So it's like, I mean, what really surprised me is a really like 278% of GDP growth from 1970s to 80. We know that GDP, like many developed countries, increase year on year, but it's like from 1970s to 1980s is a really huge leap, and that was, we were really surprised because it's like, wow, it's like doubled, more than doubled. Yeah.
Hi, it's a related question actually. You said that you got one of your colleagues to narrate the story.
Right. Yes.
Is it true? Like, is that his actual story, or was he telling a story to fit the data, or what?
It's based on kind of my story, but we want like someone else. He's actually here, the narrator. I wrote the script based on what I know and the things that my grandma used to tell me when I was young, and not only my grandma but my parents and stories I heard from other people. So we just formed the storyline this way. Thank you.
Folks, this is the last team for this afternoon. Foodies from I Square R.
Okay, good to go. So, hi, I'm Brian, and I hope you guys are enjoying this food, and it doesn't make you too hungry and eager to skip my talk and go for the food. So, laksa here is one of my favorite dishes from Singapore, and in fact, I love it so much that I've even made a mobile app for a research project, Laksa, and that actually stood for an acronym, and you can come and ask me more about that later. But today, I'll be talking about food. So here's something else to whet your appetite. It's roast duck rice, and it's something I remember growing up really loving and having a lot of it from the Marine Parade Hawker Center. And there's really something about that juicy succulence that's very appealing, and just makes me want to have it. Well, it's actually the skin and the fat. So I have studied overseas for a long time, and it's been really difficult to get all this food. So it's really nice now to be able to so easily enjoy this and many other cuisines in Singapore and so many places around the island. And in fact, this is just one of the many dishes that I love in Singapore. However, these dishes have a limited shelf life. It will be a great pity that some of these dishes would end up disappearing because the experts who cook them no longer are around to cook. Therefore, our visualization from the team is dedicated to our national love of Singapore's favorite dishes. We call it Food Loves Fellowship. It's interactive, and I hope many of you will get to try it out. It's available online. You can play around with it on my tablet later. But for a quick introduction, I'll let a musician whistle what you can do with our data visualization. So you can see we started off showing the celebration of our love of food, but our visualization also reminds us to share this love with friends and family. So we did this as a team of 4 of us here, who are fellow food lovers and friends. We bring together expertise in software, human-computer interaction, data science, and design. Many of us hail from the Institute for Infocom Research. And so I'll briefly talk about what did we make with this visualization. It's basically a multi-part story using different media, photography, visualizations, 3D animation. We follow a narrative arc to try to engage the users. And we also use various visualization and interaction techniques. And we pull together data sources from private and public sources. So this has been very enjoyable for us to build. I've had many nights being hungry, and I hope you guys get to enjoy it.